This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Well, welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps and Discipleship Pastor here at Southridge Church, and I'm with Scott Beha, our lead pastor. It's been a while since I've been here, but I'm glad to be back with you all today. Now, before I go any further, I just want to make sure to let you know, if you have not liked or subscribed to this podcast, make sure that you do so you don't miss out on anything new that we drop weekly. But we are in another week, it's our second week of our series, Bumper Sticker Theology, which has been interesting because it's been totally two different dynamics over the last 2 weeks. The first week was about something that a lot of people might say that isn't actually found anywhere in the Bible. I think of those TikToks or whatever where they're like, show me in the Bible. Yeah. But so that's one thing. And then this week you talked a lot about context, taking scripture and pulling it out of context and making it kind of mean something that maybe it doesn't actually mean. And you use the example from Philippians, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. But let's talk a little bit more about context and why it's so important, and maybe give a few other examples of context or scripture taken out of context in the Bible.
Yeah, so context when it comes to any sort of communication is completely critical, because without it, context clues are what help us bring about understanding and meaning. They're what kind of colors the words. Like, I didn't use this on Sunday because I know that it's kind of lame, but if I'm not mistaken, in Spanish, con, C-O-N, it means with, right? Because you'll always order like chili con queso, so you're getting something with cheese.
Arroz con pollo.
Yeah, so con is with.
Rice.
So
with
context is all the stuff that comes with the text, right? And so it's all the stuff that comes around it to help you bring understanding out of it. And like this can be anything from like, hey, if I know the location that this is happening, that helps inform my understanding. If I know the time period that this is happening, this helps inform my understanding. If I know the people that are involved, hey, there's a man and he is this, does this profession. There's a woman, they're brothers and sisters, right? All of that context helps us come to understand what it is that we're supposed to get out of the stories or things like that.
You just made me think of, I don't remember which radio station, of that whole bit about like they're both married but not to each other. It's
yeah. That's helpful context, because if they say, hey, these two radio hosts are married, but if they don't add but not to each other, then you probably would assume, again, that's context is very, very helpful when it comes to that. And so that's why, and this is, I mentioned it a little bit Sunday, but like really, really bad preaching and teaching, they always lack context when the bad teachers and preachers will do something called proof texting, where they will say, here is my point, and then I will go find one verse that will say that, but that verse may or may not actually mean that within the true context. But if I show you a point up on the screen and say this, and then I show you a Bible verse just by itself, you go, oh man, see, it's there. It's there. But this is not the way that you should study the Bible. It's not the way that you should teach the Bible, because you're going to come to some really weird, like I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I mean, it really does not take much critical thinking to go like, no, you can't.
Right.
No, you can't. And it doesn't take a whole lot of even theological training to go, and that's not even God's desire for you, is for you to do all things.
Yeah.
God has gifted all of us to do some things, not all things.
Yeah.
If I could do all things, then he wouldn't need you, right? He wouldn't need anyone else. Like, he would just give one person to do all. Like, it's not even like logically a solid statement. So again, I don't know where we have erred so much on this, but this isn't the only thing. So like, when it comes to, and I know this is a topic that's like close to home for you, when it comes to my stance and our church's stance on women in ministry, like, we get demonized by certain people for our egalitarian stance. But here's what I would say. Even if for people that disagree with me, understand it's not that I'm reading a different Bible than you.
Right.
It's that I am interpreting those verses in context of what I know was going on historically when they were being written.
Yeah.
Therefore, for me, I am coming to a different theological conclusion about this. So, like, and this is what happens with a lot of Bible verses, like when they get taken out of context, or if the person who is teaching or preaching it is not giving credence to the context. And again, people that disagree with me on the topic of women in ministry, I'm not saying that they neglect context either. They're just coming to a different conclusion. But it does bug me whenever I get like pigeonholed for like, oh, you're a liberal theologian, because you're egalitarian. It's like, no, I still am like very conservative in the way that I come to the Bible. With this, there's just so much context that needs to go into it. Like specifically, like this, the big time verse that everyone goes to is in 1 Timothy chapter 2. And inside that same verse where, folks come to the idea that women shouldn't preach, inside that same thing, it says men should lift their hands when they're praying. We don't enforce that whatsoever. We know that was contextual to what was going on there.
Yeah.
It says women should be modest in their appearance. They should wear decent and appropriate clothing, not to draw attention to themselves by the way they fix their hair or by wearing gold or pearls. Like we don't like check the women when they come in the door on Sundays for gold and pearls.
Yeah.
Even complementarian churches don't outlaw pearls. So why is that? Clearly there was something contextual going on that, like, hey, certain folks, certain women that wear these were part of. And again, this is where you have to know the cultural context by which Paul's writing this. This is why context is key. It's the same thing with, like, this is one of the reasons why Jeremiah 29:11 used to be my life verse, and then I came to understand context and go, oh, that's actually not written to me. That's actually a promise for someone else.
Yeah.
So it probably doesn't make a lot. Now, I am not saying that God does not have a great hope and future for people that trust in it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that verse is not actually a promise to you. Those are two different ideas. God can have a great hope and a future for you, whether he has a verse for it or not. That verse was for Israel and about how he was going to bring them back after exile. It has nothing to do, like, specifically with you in that. Again, that's context. That's where context comes into it. That's why I was like, Jeremiah 29:11 is not my life verse anymore.
Yeah.
That's why I went to 1 Timothy as my new life verse when Paul talks about how he's the worst of all sinners, because that's mine. Now, so like context is so important. Again, Genesis 1-11. Depending on the context that you read that in, will depend on how you come to understand a lot of things in the Bible and a lot of things in theology. And people that get labeled as like liberal theologians in regards to their stance on creation and all this different stuff is simply because they are reading those passages in light of a different context than what the people. Both of them are coming from the Bible, which I think it's unfair to like label people like conservative or liberal or you're a heretic because you read this contextually differently than I do. And so this happens a lot in the Bible. So you have to understand all these contexts, all these parts of context, who the author was, when was it written, what was the literature in those areas like.
Yeah, who was it written to?
All the audiences matter greatly in all of this. The time period. This is why, like, when people like will accuse the Bible of being misogynistic and they'll accuse the Bible of being pro-slavery, like just nonsense. It's like, look at the time period in which it was written in. Look at how God is having to appeal to humanity based on where they're at in human history. Yeah. He can't make people in 4000 BC behave like people in 2023.
Right.
That's a nonsensical idea of morality and ethics and the way that morality and ethics is shaped through human experience. This is just not a logical way. Yeah. They're missing the context. And so Philippians 4:13 happened to be the focus this past week, but really all of the Bible, if you don't read it in context, you are going to come to some really strange views, or you might be holding on to and I know some people find comfort in some of these verses and such, and like maybe like you need to see things differently. Maybe that's why some Christians have such like a Pollyanna like view of prosperity and things like that, and it goes because you're holding on to a bunch of promises that were taking them out of context. They're not actually for you. And that's why you're not able to deal with the harsh realities of life sometimes. So, look, when it comes to the Bible, context is king, and when it comes to Philippians 4:13, too many people get it wrong.
Yeah. No, I love that you used that text. I remember teaching it to kids during a series. I think we called it like supersized or something, and we had all these supersized things and we really, that focus through that whole month was about contentment, because that is what that scripture is about. And it was so cool to be able to teach kids that aspect, and allow them to know that, at a young age, that's what it's talking about. And so I loved that. But you kind of ended and talked about how the trouble with this for most people is that we don't necessarily invite God into all things. Like, we'll give him just a part of our lives or a part of whatever, trust him with just a little bit, but not all things. And so when you're not giving God all things, you're not seeking him in all things, then there's no way that you can do all things through him. So let's talk about that just a little bit more, because I think that was a fantastic point.
Here is what I probably didn't say it clear enough on Sunday. Here is how I came to the realization that there were probably people sitting there going, yes, but I'm not experiencing this strength that you keep talking about in all things. And the reason why I feel like people probably had that experience is because that's my experience. Is I have been asking God for months now, why is it that there are certain areas of my life that like I just don't seem to be able to get a grasp on? And it was like this past week he goes, it's because you're just not letting me be a part of it. You've just decided that this is just going to be you, and I'm going to be over here. And until I get over here into that situation, I can't do anything about it. And that's like most people will whine and fuss about being broke, but they won't invite God into their finances. So how is God supposed to bless something that he's not allowed to be a part of? Right? Like, you want God to bless your marriage, but you don't invite God into your home to be the center of your home. You just expect he's just going to snap his fingers and do all this, but he's got to be in that. Like, if you want him to help you get victory over certain temptations and sins and stuff, you got to actually ask him into that instead of trying to white knuckle it and try to do it on your own. And so you can't experience the strength of God in all things if God's not in all things in your life. And just so many people just live totally compartmentalized, where it's like, okay, when it comes to relationships, that's me, God. You're not allowed to tell me who to date. You're not allowed to tell me who to marry. You're not allowed to tell me how far is too far, or all this stuff. Or people go, sorry, God, you're not allowed in my finances. I know that, you're calling me to be more generous to your kingdom and all that, but you don't know, you don't know the struggle. We got bills and all this stuff. And so people keep God out of their finances and out of their relationships, and they don't invite him into all these different things that we want God to bless. All these things. You want God to bless your children, then make God the center of your children's life instead of whatever it is that you are making the center of their life. Because without that, until he's in all things, you're not going to be able to do all things through his strength that he has put in front of you. You're not going to be able to find that joy and contentment and peace that we talked about on Sunday if he's not in that situation. And so that's where most people just live, with God on the fringe. He's just like wall. He's like a piece of art on the wall that it's nice to look at every once in a while, but it's not the center of the room. He's just over there in times of trouble. We go and we pick up a little bit of Jesus. This is what happens. I can't not tell you the amount of times this happens. Like, people show up at church, hey, what's been going on in your life or whatnot? Oh man, life's just awful. That's why I'm at church. They'll literally say that. That's why I'm at church. We decided to give church a try. And it's like, okay, but then as soon as life starts going good again, they're like, oh, see you later. We're out of here. And it goes this is not what it looks like to actually follow Jesus. And I was talking about it on Sunday. I'm reading the book of Numbers right now in my personal time. And I've seen this tons I've studied the Old Testament since I was a kid, probably through like Bible quizzing and things like that. But like when the cloud would get up and move, the people just got up and moved. Like it was like God was actually in charge.
Yeah.
It wasn't like they were having a discussion like, oh, God, we would really like, we're going to walk this way, and if you wouldn't mind just bringing your cloud of blessing over here to where we're headed. It was like, no, like God moved and the people moved. God stopped and the people stopped. God said this, like God said, hey, bring stuff in for the tabernacle and all this. They brought stuff in. Like they just actually let God be in charge. Now, this was one of the healthier probably times of Israel's history. They didn't always do this.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying like if you go 5 chapters later that they're not going to be screwing it up because they did.
Yeah, or whining or complaining about something.
But like it did in that chapter that I looked at, I was like, man, this looks like God's actually in charge. It looks like the people literally won't move. They will not make a decision unless God is the one doing it. And I was like, that's actually what we're supposed to be doing. That's like, it's like, what are we gonna like? Where are we gonna live at? Okay, I'm not just gonna choose based on who has the best salary or what has the best market. Like, I'm actually going to go, God, where do you want me to live?
Yeah.
I thought it was beautiful when we were in Indiana with that church a couple weeks ago. We were meeting. We met one of their staff. He was from, where was that guy from? I don't think you were in the room. It's when we were doing the strategic calendar.
Yeah.
He was from Egypt.
Oh, yeah.
And he said there's big hubs of people from Egypt in like Portland, Indiana, and somewhere in New Jersey. And he said the way that they decide where they're going to live is they pick their church that they want to be a part of, and then they move to be part of a church, and then they find a job there. And I thought, wow.
Yeah.
I sure wish that Americans would do that.
Right.
Pick a church that they want to plant their family in for life, and then go, and then we'll trust God to bring about the right market conditions and the right jobs for our family and all of this. Like, but like and this is one of the hardest parts about pastoring in West Virginia, is for the most part, everyone's looking to leave. Everyone's always looking like. Every time a new young family joins our church, it's like, yeah, within 3 years, Pittsburgh's going to be calling, Florida's going to be calling. Everybody has bigger salaries. It's because, like, we are so focused on just chasing bottom line, like what we want most, and then just, oh, God, please send your cloud over there because we're going there whether you like it or not, God. Just please send your cloud of blessing over there. But, like, with this Egyptian community, they literally, like, this guy was in Indiana because they wanted to be part of this church and then just trusted that God would take care of the rest of it. And I was like, that is so backwards from the way that American families function, because for them it looks like God's actually in charge. And for a lot of Americans, like, we literally, like, we will go start a business or we will get into a relationship and then we will pray, God, please bless us.
Right.
Well, now you're already in it. Like, you didn't ask God if you should be in this relationship or start this business or move there. You're just there, and now you're just pleading, God, please come bless what I'm already doing, rather than like, hey, God, I'm just going to follow you, and when I follow you, I know that I'll live in your blessing. Yeah. It's just a backwards way of doing life. I'm not saying that I'm innocent of it. It's just something that I see.
Yeah. No, that's so good. I think it's so important to just remember, to kind of pay attention to what's going on in your life, kind of take some time. A next step that I think would be fantastic for most people that are listening is to just take some time over the next week or, the next day or so, like whatever, and ask God, like really seek and be a little bit self-reflective to see, okay, where are some areas that I'm not actually inviting God into? Like, what are those areas that I need to allow him to be in charge of, so that I can trust him better, to where I can see that blessing come. Because I think that's so often we don't do that, and then we blame God when things don't work out. Or whatever, because we're just not really seeking him on the front end.
Because you went and you just did your own thing. And every time Israel tried to go somewhere without God, it like I was reading just this morning, I was reading about how, like, they were supposed to go in the promised land. They wouldn't. So God said, sorry, you're going to the wilderness. You're just going to wander around the rest of your life. You're going to have no impact whatsoever. And so then they're like, oh, no, we don't want to do that. So they try to go take the promised land by themselves, and they get run out of town by people that, had they gone when God told them to go, they would have demolished them, because they went when they wanted to go instead of with God. They got demolished. And this is what is happening to so many Christians. They cannot figure out why they are not living in the blessing of God. It's because you do not actually care what God says. You're just asking Him to bless whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah.
And that is like a veiled version of Western Christianity that just goes like, yeah, we're going to do whatever we want, and then we're just going to see if God will be okay with it.
I think it goes really well with the illustration that you said, second service that God gave you. Yeah. Share that with people real quick that maybe weren't part of second service or heard first service.
Yeah, so the picture that God painted in my mind was that for most Western Christians, and I do say most, and I'm even guilty of this from time to time, so I'm not trying to call people out about something. This is something I got to come to reckon with in my life as well, that a lot of times it looks like God has partial custody. He's the dad that you see every other weekend when there's nothing else going on, and that most of us the world is our mother, and we're just with her all the time, and she has all the influence and everything on us, and then every once in a while we'll go see Dad on the weekend, right? Jesus gets 1 hour on Sunday 1.8 times a month or whatever it is. He doesn't show, we don't have a divine appointment with God on Monday morning or Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning. It's just partial visitation. Hey, I'll come see you in a couple weeks, God. But until then, would you just mind blessing all this other stuff that I'm doing? And he goes like, man, this is not what it looks like. When Jesus said, if you want to gain your life, you actually have to lose it. If you got to pick up your cross and follow me. You have to give up the whole world. Yeah. But if you'll do that, you'll gain your soul. I don't know how we ever got all that so mixed up to go no, just do whatever you want and pray God blesses it. God's good. He's going to come bail you out of all this stuff. You're causing all this. And then you don't live in the blessing of God, and then you turn around and blame God for it. He's like, well, I didn't tell you to go there anyways. I didn't tell you to get in that relationship. I didn't tell you to marry him, marry her. I didn't tell you to, start that business. I didn't tell you to move to that community or whatever it is. We do all this stuff, and then we turn around and blame God for it and go it's because most of us just are not living we're not letting the cloud lead whatsoever. We're still in charge.
Yep, absolutely. So, awesome. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this, that you spend some time reflecting over the next few days, and really just allow God to be part of all things in your life. As always, we drop new content every week, so make sure that you like or subscribe so that way you don't miss out on anything new.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.